in the borderland near the town of Kazel, which is located in the mountainous area. Recently, this place has been hit by a terrible drought, which has seriously affected the economy of this small town. Over the past few days, wells have been drying up, leaving many people teetering on the brink of life and death. The agricultural fields are cracking, and people, gripped by fear for their future, are beginning to leave the village. The Margrave who commands these lands considers the behavior of the simple peasants to be a pathetic betrayal. He immediately sends soldiers to punish the apostates and destroy anyone who tries to escape. A real massacre begins, during which the knights simply kill defenseless people without a twinge of conscience. One can only guess what happens to these soldiers and why they decide to commit such a brutal war crime. Even children are left unprotected from deadly violence simply because they want to live a better life. Prayers do not stop the soldiers, and they continue to commit atrocities with particular cruelty even at night. At the head of this madness stands the Margrave's son, who, judging by everything, takes terrible pleasure in what is happening. This obnoxious aristocrat proudly declares that the blood of divine kings flows in his veins, and this obviously clouds his mind. He asks the peasants if they understand why they have managed to survive to this day, despite their insignificance. Pointing to himself, he claims that all this happens by the grace of his lordship, and those in whose veins divine blood flows. Looking at the exhausted people, he says that as soon as they live a few days without rain, they immediately decide to run away, having lost their conscience. The girl tries to beg for forgiveness and asks that at least the child, whom she is trying with all her might to save, be spared. Suddenly, a particularly frostbitten knight approaches her and delivers a swift blow with his spear, piercing her right through. The child can only watch as his unfortunate mother dies from her injuries. A few moments later, her lifeless body falls to the ground, and a pool of blood begins to flow out of it. The Margrave's son remarks that this murder seems boring to him, and he doesn't even have time to properly enjoy it. One of the knights apologizes to him and asks what can be done to cheer him up. After some time, they approach an improvised gallows on which several men are hanging. Looking at this picture, the Margrave's son joyfully notes that parents support their children, and wives support their husbands. After some time, one of the knights approaches him, informing him that an unforeseen situation has arisen. Pointing to the captive couple, he says that the man is wounded and can be hung by the waist, otherwise he will die too quickly. The woman, trying to protect her husband, looks at them with tears in her eyes, hoping that fate will be more merciful. However, no one can help them, and the knights, without the slightest twinge of conscience, tie up the unfortunate peasant. They respond to any attempts by the wife to save her husband with loud screams and strong blows to the face. The woman begins to cry sincerely, unable to bear the severe emotional trauma, but her husband is still conscious. Looking into his eyes, she realizes that if she holds on long enough, she might be able to save him from such a cruel fate. The Margrave's son watches this heartbreaking scene and a smile appears on his face. Then he begins to laugh. Looking at what is happening, he says that it is the most magnificent sight he has ever seen. Coming closer to the girl, he says that she is a good girl and should hold her husband as tightly as possible. His sadistic smile shows that without her, her lover's veins will burst and he will die a very quick and painful death. Suddenly, a voice comes from behind him, advising him to be careful, as the blood of divine kings does not grant immunity. The Margrave's son turns around and sees behind him a man dressed in better armor than the other knights. He asks with a smile why Sir Zeybek suddenly decided to honor them with his presence at such a pleasant moment. Coming closer to him, he arrogantly says that he did not expect to see his fencing teacher here, and his face becomes even more disgusting. Sir Zeybek asks why go so far in punishing people, since an aristocrat must remain noble. The Margrave's son replies that his nobility will not suffer in the least if no one speaks about what is happening here. Pointing to the peasants, he says that these fools dared to dishonor his honor just because the rain was a little delayed. The Margrave's son also asks his interlocutor whether he intends to spread rumors about his actions. He reminds that he is a holy knight, recognized by the royal church, and must not bring shame on the order. Sir Zeybek says that it is impossible to hide the truth forever, and sooner or later everything will become public knowledge. The Margrave's son sighs in irritation, then looks at his interlocutor with contempt, wondering what to do with him. The knights ask if they should kill the man, but he only orders them to bring the whip, as he may still need it. After this, he begins to beat the defenseless girl, who is still holding her husband, with pleasure. Sir Zeybek watches these atrocities, realizing that he can do nothing to stop them. After some time, the Margrave's son finally satisfies his sadistic fantasies and calms down for a while. His arm is getting tired, but his face shows that he is encouraged by the fact that he beat up an innocent girl. Looking at her suffering, he says that it is so beautiful that he cannot take his eyes off it and admire it to his heart's content. After this, he happily heads towards Sir Zeybek, fully understanding that nothing will happen to him for this. As he passes by, he advises his teacher to smile so as not to look sad at this celebration of life, since otherwise he will ruin everything. With a sly smile, he adds that one must enjoy life, otherwise it will simply lose all meaning. Sir Zeybek does not answer, realizing that he can only put up with the cruel injustice of what is happening. After some time, sunset comes, and most of the women who supported their husbands die of dehydration. The husband of one of the girls who had been holding him all this time tells her to run away, because it is no longer possible to save him. He also apologizes to her and admits that he was wrong in advising her to run while there was still a chance to save her life. A girl named Sophia refuses to leave, continuing to hold him tightly and hoping that help will finally come. She hugs her husband's body and says that this time the Emperor's heralds must come to their aid. She looks at the ground with eyes full of hope and despair, which fight with each other as her body weakens. She traces a small triangle with the toe of her shoe and hopefully asks herself if the heralds will come to the rescue. After some time, night falls, and an unknown knight approaches the girl, offering her a flask of water. Sophia is already losing consciousness, and only a small sip of liquid helps her come to her senses after a while. She found herself very weak, but immediately after waking up, she wondered who decided to visit her, hoping that it was a hero. Sir Zebek looks at her with a sympathetic look and, lifting a spoon with soup, asks if she can eat herself or if she needs to be fed. The girl nods, not fully understanding him, after which, throughout the night, Sir Zebek tries to take care of her so that she does not die. Morning comes, and the girl falls asleep, no longer having the strength to hold up her husband's body, who himself will soon die of exhaustion. Sir Zebek is nearby all this time, holding a sword in his hands to scare off robbers or animals that already smell the scent of prey. Watching the sunrise, he gently shakes Sophia and tells her to wake up as soon as possible. He adds that he came without the others knowing, and it's time for him to leave, because if they find out about this, he will be punished very seriously. After this, he leans over to discuss with her the difficult situation involving her fiancé. Looking at the body of a man whose life has long since left him, Sir Zebek says that unfortunately, there is nothing that can be done for this poor man. Sophia looks at her dead husband with eyes full of shock and despair, although such an outcome was predictable. However, what she does next surprises the knight, who has been through many battles and seen many misfortunes. Sophia continues to hold her husband's body, not hiding her trembling from the terrible grief she is experiencing. After this, she asks the knight to state his name, promising to ask the clan of heralds to intercede for him when they come. Sir Zebek asks her in surprise if she means those very heralds about whom so many bad rumors are circulating. These heroes are soulless destroyers of holiness, working only under contract and knowing no mercy. Sophia's face, considerably sunken, expresses firm agreement, showing that it was with these creatures that she made a deal. Sir Zebek says he doesn't know if the heralds exist, but even if they do appear, they will be met with strong resistance. He adds that the lord who governs these lands is a descendant of blue bloods. Sir Zebek reminds us that this is the blood of Agas, which has immense power to be reckoned with. Sophia replies that even if the Margrave's son is a magician, the Herald clan will be able to destroy him, because they are also sorcerers. She angrily reminds the knight that the heralds are called destroyers of holiness because they killed the king. Sir Zebek concludes that the girl is out of her mind with grief, because after such events it is difficult to maintain sanity. After this he states his name, adding that he is a holy knight of the royal church. He emphasizes that he did not give his name out of fear of death at the hands of the destroyers of holiness. He frowns and declares that if they come, he will gladly destroy them because it is his duty. After this he leaves, saying that he will try to return at night to bring food and water. Sophia looks at the symbol she drew and says in a tired voice that she only has 2 days to wait. She briefly reminisces about the time when everything was still good and her husband was alive. He showed her a special coin, saying that it was a gift to be cherished and never thrown away. The enamored Sophia carefully twirled the coin in her hands and asked her husband what it was. Her husband looked at her carefully and asked her cautiously if she had ever heard of the Herald clan. Sophia looks at him, realizing that she is only hearing childhood legends, which she always considered fiction. Her father once told her a story that mentioned legendary wanderers who inspired fear and awe. She asks him if he is talking about those very soulless destroyers of holiness that everyone should fear and avoid. Her husband tells her that this gold coin has the power to summon the emperor's soulless heralds when the need arises. He also advises her to be careful and not show this coin to anyone to avoid problems. He explains that if anyone finds the coin, the inquisitors of the royal church will punish them for collaborating with heretics. At that moment, he kisses her, taking advantage of the opportunity to get close enough to his beloved. Sophia pushes him away, a little frightened by this strange story, and realizing that he might not be telling her something. After this, she asks why he decided to give her such a dangerous coin if it could get her killed. The husband smiles and says that he is giving it to her just in case, so that she takes care of it. He also explains what to do if something happens to them and you have to use the coin to summon such powerful allies. According to the rules, you need to draw a triangle on the ground and place this imperial coin in its center. It is then that this will signal the heralds, and they will come to help, no matter how far they are and no matter how difficult the task. The husband expresses hope that it will not come to this, but at this point the narrative returns to the present. Unfortunately, this girl has less and less time left, but she still can only wait for someone to come to her aid. She holds on with all her might, telling herself that she needs to hold out until the evening, so that the forces of salvation will come then. However, after some time, she falls to the ground, completely losing her vitality and dying. This girl's story ends sadly, as she never received the promised help. Meanwhile, we are transported to the knights, who, despite the destruction and misfortune around them, feel confident. Ordinary soldiers do not experience a shortage of water, despite the drought that reigns all around. Sir Zebek stands some distance from the camp, watching the sun, which is especially merciless today. He begins to worry about the girl he left by the tree, fearing that the heat might kill her. The Margrave's son approaches the knight and asks why he is not smiling, sincerely not understanding why he is not cheerful. Sir Zebek advises him to moderate his bloodthirstiness, adding that killing citizens will not collect much tax. The Margrave's son says that the number of dissatisfied vagabonds is growing, and along with them, the number of thieves is also increasing. Sir Zebek reminds us that the Margrave's lands have fertile soil and suggests sending people to work there. The Margrave's son asks why those born in these lands should suffer for the sake of this useless rabble. He also expresses confidence that the peasants will still ruin the fields and run away. Sir Zebek says that people can be taught to cultivate the land, but the Margrave's son claims that they cannot be taught royal virtue. He looks at his interlocutor again and asks if he has forgotten what the king and the church teach them. The Margrave's son claims that the reason for the drought is that the people have incurred the disfavor of the church. He emphasizes that church doctrine can be interpreted in different ways, but its essence remains unchanged. Looking back at his marauding soldiers, he says that some get fertile soil while others get drought. Nevertheless, he concludes that sinners must be punished, and those who contribute to the prosperity of the land must be rewarded. Turning around, he declares that all this is being done for the well-being of people who will not behave so ungratefully. He also warns that if Sir Zebek decides to go against his orders and help others, then he should hope for the best. Sir Zebek sees off the senior aristocrat, realizing that he cannot resist his will. Evening comes, and there are almost no living souls left in the settlement where life once flourished. Sir Zebek heads to the tree where he left the girl who refused to leave her husband. However, what he saw did not inspire optimism, confirming his worst fears about the situation. Approaching his dead lovers, he reflects on the fact that he can no longer bear this. Looking at them, he understands that everything is pointless, even if the heralds appear right now. After a few moments, the aura of the place begins to change rapidly, becoming ominous. Before Sir Zebek can move, a figure appears behind him with a sword pointed straight at him. The unknown warrior says that he will kill him on the spot if he dares to move. Sir Zebek tries to understand how a swordsman with such a stealthy technique appeared in this forgotten place. He asks the warrior if he is a herald, and he confirms that he is. Sir Zebek introduces himself and says that he serves the royal church, after which a slight smile appears on his face. After this, he asks him if he is his contractor, emphasizing that this would be a very strange development of events. Sir Zebek, dispelling the excitement, turns around and asks if he is trying to humiliate him with such assumptions. The Dark Herald calmly turns to the side, trying to get a good look at the man who had signed the contract with him. Seeing a girl lying next to the drawn symbol, he assumes that it was she who summoned him. He also asks the knights what is going on here, and Sir Zebek replies that if he steps back a couple of steps, he will tell him the whole truth. The herald smiles again, realizing that such a request would not be difficult to fulfill. A few moments pass, and he is already at a distance of several tens of meters. Sir Zebek turns around in shock and looks at the warrior, assuming that he is looking at a real ghost. The herald sheathes his sword and asks if Sir Zebek hopes this will prevent him from attacking. After this, he even praises him, noting that if he serves the royal church, then he has courage and fortitude. Sir Zebek asks if he is a mage, to which the herald replies that everyone in his clan is a mage except himself. Sir Zebek asks incredulously if he is taking him for a fool and trying to tell him that this is not magic. Herald explains that it is very difficult for a layman to distinguish magic from human power. Sir Zebek asks what this man's name is and what rank he holds in the Herald clan. Herald reminds that he has already introduced himself and confirms that he actually did so. After this, he bows and says that his name is Azadin and he is the 108th spirit from the clan of Imperial Heralds. Sir Zebek understands that this is the lowest rank in the Herald clan, but notes that his movements are honed with incredible skill. Azadin, smiling, says that now the time has come to fulfill the promise that Sir Zebek gave him. Several minutes pass, during which the knight manages to tell the strange warrior about what happened here. Azadin listens to the story with interest, then shakes his head and remarks that he did not expect anything else. Suddenly, a voice is heard above their heads, informing them that the contract has already been signed and there is no turning back. Looking up at the sky, Sir Zebek sees a large owl acting strangely and flying too early to be a predator. The owl, perched on Azadin's shoulder, reports that she responded to the request, but by the time he arrived, the contract was already dead. Sir Zebek can't believe his eyes, as he has never seen a talking owl before. Meanwhile, the owl declares that it is necessary to go on another mission and rest is unacceptable. Azadin turns around irritably. Sir Zebek decides to stop him for a little talk. He asks him if he is going to walk away from the reward and do nothing after the death of those who ordered it. Azadin asks if Sir Zebek wants the girl's will to be fulfilled, since his master will suffer because of it. Sir Zebek carefully takes out his weapon and declares that he will not allow this and that the Wicked One will not leave here. After this, he challenges Azadin and promises to defeat him as quickly as possible to prevent the spread of evil. Azadin asks if Sir Zebek truly wants to shed his blood with a sword that has long served justice. Sir Zebek begins to get angry looking at him, and Azadin suggests that for a man like him, this would be extremely sad. Smiling, Azadin asks if he is angry at him or at himself for turning away from the suffering. Sir Zabek gradually loses his composure and asks if Azadin understands what is happening. Azadin asks if he is familiar with the constellations of the night sky and the myths associated with them. Sir Zabek wonders what these questions are for and what Azadin is trying to say with these riddles. Azadin raises his head to the sky and explains that people see one thing but feel something completely different. He adds that for some, the constellation is a hero of legends, while for others, it is just a dim, pale luminary. He also says that just as the same act of violence can look different, in his eyes everything has a different color. Approaching the hanged peasant, he notes that, compared to ordinary soldiers, these people did not harm them in any way. Sir Zabek objects, arguing that there is no difference between these people. He looks them in the eye and admits that he doesn't see the difference only because he couldn't do anything about it. Immediately after this, he plunges into lengthy reflection and introspection regarding the reasons for his helplessness. He convinces himself that as a knight of the royal church, he is obliged to feel those in whose veins divine blood flows and to obey them. Azadin says in a calm voice that he does not want to fight the holy knight, especially if he feels sorry for the girl. With these words, he draws his sword, quickly cuts the ropes and frees the hanged men. Intercepting the lifeless body, he says that in this case his sword will not become an enemy to the knight's sword. Sir Zabek himself does not want to continue the duel, because he realizes that he has much more in common with this man than it seems. Laying two lifeless bodies next to each other, Azadin asks the knight if he has a shovel. Sir Zabek watches in amazement as the herald carefully lays the dead on the dry ground. He asks if he really decided to bury them right here, despite the fact that no one asked him to do so. Azadin confirms his suspicions, saying that he simply wants to conduct a burial for them. Sir Zabek recalls that the Count demands that these people remain hanging from the trees, slowly dying as a warning to others. Azadin ignores the knight's doubts and remarks that if he doesn't have a shovel, then nothing can be done. With these words, he strains his arms and begins to tear up the dry earth to dig graves. Sir Zabek looks at him silently, after which his own armor begins to move. Azadin hears a man in armor land next to him and begin working with all his might. Having thrust his sword into the ground, the knight begins to dig it up to dig a second grave for a simple peasant. After some time, after all the efforts, they bury the bodies and read a prayer to repose their souls. Azadin participates in this ceremony, which surprises the knight, since he did not expect that the herald knows the prayers of the Order of the Saviors. Sir Zabek looks at him suspiciously and says that he has never heard of heralds using the prayers of the Order. Azadin calmly replies that he sees nothing wrong with this, since their ideology is close to him. Sir Zabek continues to observe the warrior and notices that he is incredibly reckless and daring. He is also surprised that Azadin turned away from his clan and believed in heresy, but the herald replies that it does not matter much. He emphasizes that if a person doubts the correctness of his faith, then clan affiliation is no longer important. Sir Zabek asks what he doesn't like about the Order of Saviors and why he decided to join the heretics. Instead of a direct answer, Azadin unfastens one of his belts without explaining why he is doing this. After a few moments, he forms a powerful bow from his belt and says that trouble is coming their way. Sir Zabek turns around in surprise, and Azadin adds that the one he is obliged to honor is approaching. This turns out to be true, as the Margrave's son is moving in their direction with a small detachment of knights. He smiles nastily and asks his comrade if he really liked this peasant woman so much. He grins and adds that if he had said so straight away, he would have given him access to her body. He notes that for a country bumpkin she was damn attractive, and considers her death a bummer. Sir Zabek realizes that they are in an extremely dangerous position, as there are about 20 heavily armed soldiers in front of them. Assessing his chances, he realizes that he has no chance of winning with such numerical superiority. The Margrave's son, feeling his superiority, asks who this freak is next to the knight. Azadin calmly takes out an arrow and begins to draw his bow, showing no respect for his opponents. A moment later, he fires an arrow that hits one of the soldiers in the back rows. The shot proves almost fatal. The arrow pierces the eye and passes right through the soldier's brain. Surviving this is problematic even if you are a very strong soldier, clad in very heavy armor. Such a brutal murder causes panic and confusion among the remaining soldiers. Sir Zabek is amazed by what is happening and wonders how this man managed to hit the soldier's eye so precisely from such a distance. Azadin decides not to stop and continues firing at the detachment of the Margrave's son. The soldiers in the front line raise their shields, trying to protect themselves from arrows and gain a small advantage. However, when the arrow reaches its target, it becomes clear that shields do not protect against such destructive force. One of the soldiers, who is in the path of the arrow, receives a serious wound, which turns out to be slightly lower than one might imagine. He falls to the ground and begins to wheeze as his shield turns into a useless piece of wood. This causes even more fear among the rank and file, who realize that their armor has been rendered useless. Sir Zabek notices that the herald's arrow pierces the shield and bends in flight, like a living snake rushing towards its target. Azadin suddenly turns to his comrade and says that he is ready to explain why he likes the idea of the order so much. As he draws another arrow, he remarks that he likes the idea that a person's dignity is determined only by his actions. Continuing to aim, he adds that this applies to everyone, even the descendants of the divine king. The Margrave's son begins to get angry. realizing that they are talking about him and his cruel deeds, for which he now faces punishment. Azadin continues his monologue, arguing that such people cannot be called aristocrats and must be punished. This is the last straw, and the Margrave's son understands that he must destroy this scoundrel as quickly as possible. The Margrave's son turns to Sir Zebek and tells him that he orders him to finish off this bastard. Azadin decides not to test his comrade's moral compass in such a situation and takes to the air. As soon as he reaches a suitable height, he immediately begins shooting at the soldiers with his bow. Ordinary fighters, who do not possess superhuman reflexes, have no chance of dodging the arrows flying at them. Azadin, in turn, does not want to leave a large number of witnesses, so he strives to destroy as many enemies as possible. At the place where he is about to land, he is met by several spearmen who intend to finish him off. However, thanks to his acrobatic skills, he lands on the safe part of the spear and suppresses the attack's momentum. Immediately after this, he takes to the air again, giving himself another opportunity to thin out the ranks of his opponents. Another rain of arrows mercilessly kills or maims everyone who becomes its target. Even the Margrave's son gets it, but he gets away with only a slight wound and the loss of a lock of hair. His bodyguards are much less fortunate, as they face either death or severe disability. The Margrave's son looks at what is happening with horror and understands that this man does not intend to kill every single one of them. The idea that they are simply trying to disable them irritates the aristocrat. He asks who Azadin is. Azadin suddenly materializes behind him, politely introduces himself, and adds that he is a herald. These words make the Margrave's son turn around in horror, as such creatures have an extremely bad reputation. The soldiers immediately take a few steps back, realizing that one of the soulless warriors has appeared in front of them. The Margrave's son tries to quickly turn around to avoid being hit in the back and try to counterattack. Azadin reaches for his quiver and finds that he is out of arrows, so he decides to change tactics. Before the Margrave's son can do anything, he is punched right in the face. The force of this blow causes him to fall down and hit his head hard on the dry ground, making a characteristic dull sound. Azadin calmly returns the bow to its original position, turning it into a regular belt. For a while he remains on horseback, looking around and enjoying the screams of the aristocrat who has damaged his eye. After he jumps to the ground, one of the soldiers takes aim at him, intending to attack him from behind. Azadin dodges without much trouble, leaving the knight in a very vulnerable position for a counterattack. However, the Dark Herald decides not to take advantage of this advantage, and limits himself to a powerful blow directly to the knight's face. After this, he raises his sword and says that he has reduced the number of enemies with his arrows. Looking back at those who remained in front of him, he adds that if they have enough courage, they can attack. Hearing the strange panting sounds of one of the knights he had just knocked to the ground, Azadin declares that he had forgotten something. With these words, he strikes a powerful blow, aimed not at killing the knight, but at castrating him. This brutal behavior makes the other soldiers shudder in horror, realizing that in front of them is not just an experienced swordsman, but a sadist. However, they decide to attack together in order to deal with him using their numerical superiority. The outcome of this massacre is predictable, as all the knights are left maimed and disfigured. Azadin approaches the Margrave's son and sarcastically asks how long he has been waiting for his fate. He also calls him a pathetic piece of trash who revels in the suffering of others and doesn't deserve a normal life. The Margrave's son makes a last desperate attempt to defend himself with incredible magic. As it turns around, it emits a powerful, bright flash of light that should blind anyone nearby. Some of the soldiers ask him to stop, but Azadin looks at him without the slightest expression. The Margrave's son claims his magic is proof of noble blood that Azadin can never match. Azadin doesn't want to listen to such nonsense and castrates the enemy with one light and quick blow of his sword. The Margrave's son does not immediately understand what is happening and carefully lowers his gaze to his body. He notices that blood is starting to drip rapidly from the place that is most dear to him. Clutching his wound, he screams loudly and asks what Azadin did to him. Azadin grins and asks if he is really that stupid, adding that his actions are completely obvious. After this, he grabs the Margrave's son by the head, and he, in a desperate attempt to save his life, asks what Azadin wants. He promises that he can give him money, women, or weapons, since he is a descendant of the sacred Aegis and a representative of the Holy Family. Azadin asks if this is true, and adds that, unfortunately for the Margrave's son, he is a destroyer of holiness. The Margrave's son begins to desperately search for salvation, and suddenly discovers that Sir Zebek is standing behind the herald. The Margrave's son shouts loudly in his direction, and demands that Sir Zebek explain why he is inactive and help him immediately. Sir Zebek lies to his ally, telling him that they are blinded by the flash and cannot tell where the enemy is. The Margrave's son angrily declares that he is an aristocrat of the Holy Family, and that pathetic common people do not dare to treat him like that. Azadin says thoughtfully that if you think about it carefully, you can come to a very interesting conclusion. Looking at his victim, Azadin praises the Margrave's son for having so much strength to continue living. Grabbing the knife, the Margrave's son says that the knife will be useful to him in life and that he should think positively. Immediately after this, Azadin strikes straight at the villain's eyes, causing him to become permanently blind. Azadin notes that his opponents are already dead, but he made sure that justice was restored. Looking around, he declares that the imperial law has been observed, which means he did the right thing. Sir Zebek draws his weapon and declares that in the name of the law that Azzadin mentioned, he cannot let him go. He adds that the fact that Azzadin did the right thing will not change anything. Azzadin understands that these knights are more trouble than they're worth, but decides to talk to Sir Zebek. With a smile on his face, he throws down the knife and notes that Sir Zebek is not at all like the typical knights of royal blood. Sir Zebek asks menacingly how he dares insult him after mentioning the imperial law. Azzadin throws up his hands and explains that he actually praised him for being different from the others. After this, he adds that ordinary knights of royal blood are just scum who were thrown out of their homes for the sake of inheritance. Sir Zebek hesitates for a moment, as these words clearly hurt his pride. Azzadin states that there is no point in this and asks the knight if he really hopes to catch up with him. Sir Zebek looks closely at his opponent and tries to understand what trap he has decided to throw this time. Azzadin disappears into thin air and says that they will meet again if fate brings them together. A few moments later, in the place where he had just stood, only clouds of smoke remain in the air and the body of the Margrave's son. Sir Zebek looks around and nods cautiously, understanding what Azzadin meant. No one was able to defeat this man, and as a result of the battle, they suffered significant losses. Sir Zebek remembers his words about the scum being driven out of the house for the sake of the inheritance, and realizes that it applies to him. Looking at the slowly rising sun, he notices that what is happening is making his chest ache. After some time, the action moves to an unknown place, where the peasants ask the Lord to exempt them from taxes this year. They say that all these people next to them are fugitive nomads who have lost their roof over their heads, and that they are no different from corpses. They also say that they barely escaped from monsters and robbers, and that paying taxes will simply destroy them. Midiam states that his quiver looked empty, so she decided to share her arrows, which can be considered help. Sternly at them, he says that it would be much worse if they also started begging for food. The peasant admits that they really would not refuse such generosity, but now it is impossible to even mention it. He carefully raises his head and says that they are in a hopeless situation. Margrave Castle haughtily says that the inferior blood in their veins will change nothing, but since they insist, he will make an allowance. The peasants raise their heads in surprise and ask if he is really serious about taking pity on them. Margrave Castle says dryly that this is exactly what he intends to do, emphasizing that the conditions for this exist. He also clearly hints to them that if they do not fulfill these conditions, they will all be hanged. Now it is clear why the son of this aristocrat behaves so terribly, since he has a shining example to follow. The peasants look at each other, trying to understand what exactly this wily aristocrat means. Margrave Castle says that they should not be afraid, because what they ask for will take up no more than 1 page. After this, he shows them the grimoire and says that this book can hold a huge number of pages. The peasants immediately fall on their knees before the devil's magic and say that they are ignorant of these matters and therefore did not know about it. Margrave Castle declares that even such hopeless blockheads as peasants should know what it is. He tells them that if they simply wish, a page of this book will answer their call and appear here. He then declares that if they can get him even 1 page, he will exempt them from taxes for 3 years. He also promises them food supplies in the form of 50 bushels of wheat, barley, and oats. The peasant asks if they need to know the name of the grimoire in order to find it for them. Margrave Castle once again resorts to magic to make the book disappear, then looks at them closely. After a short pause, he reveals that this is a copy of the Divine King's book, which was long lost. This requirement turns out to be quite serious, since the book is a powerful artifact. Suddenly, a snake appears from behind the large curtains and, as if nothing had happened, crawls towards Margrave Castle. After this, she begins to bend and undergoes a strange metamorphosis procedure that shocks an ordinary person. Having transformed into a woman, the snake reports that the mention of the Divine King's book is quite significant. Margrave Castle declares that this is all nonsense, and he does not consider it necessary to hide it in any way. The woman reminds him that he has searched far and wide for the grimoire, and that rumors will spread sooner or later. The Margrave asks the witch why she came, clearly showing his dissatisfaction with her words. The witch explains that she has come to inform him that his son has been the victim of a brutal attack. She also tells that they were defeated on the eastern part of the continent, and the Margrave is surprised that this happened. In response to his doubt, the witch says that their enemy was a clan of heralds, famous for their incredible strength. This information makes the Margrave a little nervous, as such serious opponents could hinder him. He remembers that this clan is also hunting for the Divine King's book, otherwise they will not be able to get rid of the curse. The witch says that his son did not die, but lost his eyes and reproductive organs, and then asks what to do next. The Margrave, after some thought, orders his soldiers to exterminate all heralds in the surrounding lands. Apparently the witch carefully gets to her feet and says that in this case she will contact the commander. The Margrave grabs her hand to stop her from leaving, and tells her that she should simply give the order and return to him. Having seated them on his lap, he declares that if his child is castrated, he urgently needs to get a new heir. We can only hope that the peasants who have been on their knees all this time were not witnesses to what happens next. Meanwhile, Azzadin continues his wanderings through the desert and notes that at this rate he will simply die of thirst. He wonders why it was necessary to arrange this circus with a 2-day journey, when he could have taken his time. The bizarre owl asks him how he dares to so brazenly address the lips of the emperor himself. Azzadin reminds us that because of the emperor's senseless death, His heralds are now despised by the entire world around them. He also complains that the heralds had now decided to impress the contractors with their 2-day appearances, and therefore there was no time to prepare. Azadin states that he has no water, which means the food will not be digested and he may die of hunger, but there are other problems now. After a while he stops, hearing strange sounds, and realizes that he needs to be on his guard. Energy fluctuations in the country suggest that an army of ghosts may appear before him. After a few moments, the spirits separate from the trees in which they have been hiding all this time and appear before him. The spirit of a cruelly tortured couple bows as Azadin avenges their suffering. Azadin approaches them cautiously and greets them, not wanting to incur their wrath. The spirit informs that these lands are not sanctified by either royal virtue or the blessing of archangels, and it is better not to linger here. Azadin declares that he has avenged their grievances and that they can now rest in peace, when suddenly one of the girls points something out to him. Turning his head in the direction of her finger, he discovers a well nearby. On his way there, he says that it is unnecessary because his parents could have gone on vacation and not wait for him. Coming closer, he looks down with enthusiasm, realizing that it is so dark there that it is impossible to see the water. However, he decides to pull out the bucket, thinking that he is incredibly thirsty. However, as soon as he takes out the bucket, he finds only sand and a strange page from a book. The entire clan of heralds is essentially a people formerly known as Aragus. They survived a devastating typhoon on their continent, moved and settled on the Vibris continent. This continent was originally divided between 8 divine kings of the Egas family, each of whom ruled from his own throne. However, in that era, one of them lost power over everyone and suppressed all his brothers and sisters. This king was Emperor Eslad, who sought to destroy all remnants of the sacred royal line. At the same time, foreigners known as the Aragas were desperate for new land, so the emperor offered them a deal. He gave them a grimoire called the Songs of the Yellow Bird, as well as a spirit called the Emperor's Mouth. In exchange, they sign a contract with the emperor and become known as his heralds. Immediately after this, their hands are mercilessly stained with the divine blood that they must shed. They become the emperor's sword, as well as his servants and the Inquisition, which destroys entire nations. It is the heralds who deal with undesirable nobles who enrich themselves illegally by indulging in sin. However, the death of the emperor put an end to the United Empire, dividing it into 8 independent kingdoms. Then the people are subjected to universal condemnation and are branded as heartless heroes, after which they face yet another disaster. The whole point is that the contract concluded between the ancestors and the emperor remains in force. Even after their death, they remain bound by the oath, and this prevents them from going to the afterlife. This horror has been going on for a very long time, but perhaps right now something will happen that will change the state of things. Azadin looks closely at the page, realizing that this is the source of the imperial family's divine powers. Looking at the ghosts that dissolve into thin air, he thanks them for their help and recommends that they rest in peace. After this, he decides to look at the page carefully, but some symbols still seem unclear to him. He asks if he can be freed from the debt curse and states that it is not a curse, but an honest payment for the debt. Azadin notes that the page fell into his hands, which means that fate exists, but his voice does not sound happy. He understands that he must fulfill a debt in the form of services totaling 100,000 gold coins, as well as find the book. Moving forward, he believes that from his point of view, this will begin to spread throughout the world and lead to serious problems. The whole point is that the root cause of the divine book falling apart into pages is his father. As he continues to travel, he notices that he is very thirsty and notices that someone is following him. A strange girl appears from behind a small rock and carefully watches Azadin's every move. The girl clearly knows this simple-minded herald and for some reason feels incredible hostility towards him. Continuing to watch him, she calls him the son of a clan traitor, who was a mediocrity, a weakling, and a fool. She also asks her comrade if he really is unable to use magic as they say. The young man says that he doesn't know about the curse, but Azadin definitely doesn't know how to use magic. Smiling, the girl notes that everyone says he wet the bed until he was 8 and couldn't string a bow. After this, she looks at him haughtily and wonders how this man can even fulfill the duty of a herald. The young man addresses her by name and tells her that even if the information spreads among the contractors, she should not contact Azadin. Midian suddenly takes arrows from his quiver and asks why they don't test this hero. The young man says that apprentices are not allowed to attack heralds, but the girl declares that if she defeats him, she will take his position for herself. Her companion notes that Azadin is a disciple of that fussy elder named Kazas, who has a bad reputation. Midian adds that it doesn't matter, because no matter how great Elder Kazas is, a fool will always remain a fool. She angrily reflects that the son of a traitor, who cannot even cast spells, is still listed among the heralds. She assumes that he is simply taking someone else's place, and that competent people like her cannot become heralds in his place. Taking aim with the arrow with the tip removed, she finally decides to shoot, aiming it straight towards Azadin. She doesn't wait and hide so that she can't be detected if the arrow hits Azadin's head. Curiosity gets the better of her and she carefully pokes her head out to see if the arrow hit. As soon as she raises her head, a small stone flies into her forehead, stunning her for a short time. Azadin decides to break the distance and ends up right on the stone from which the shot was fired. Midiam rubs her sore forehead and suddenly notices that Azzedine is already looking at her, if you can call it that. Showing her the quiver containing the arrow, he asks why she shot him. Midiam tries to justify himself and says that it was just a greeting and does not understand how he could have ended up here so quickly. Looking at the quiver, she realizes that Azzedine caught the arrow in flight with his quiver, managing to react in time. Azzedine looks closely at these hunters and asks them what their names are and what they are doing here. Midiam gives her name, adding that she is from the Edel clan, and the young man says that his name is Ismail and they were sent to help him. Azzedine looks at them in surprise and asks if he heard correctly that they were sent here to help him. After this, he shows the arrow he just caught and asks how it could help him. Azzedine still doesn't take them seriously and notes that they asked to be apprenticed because they were bored at home. After this, he calls them kids and advises them to go home as quickly as possible to avoid trouble. Midiam reminds him that she belongs to a noble family, so he does not dare to address her as a child. Azzedine calmly says that he is surprised that the apprentice does not know that for heralds, family affiliation does not matter. He also reminds them that they tried to shoot him and asks if they are asking for discipline. He asks them what they think will happen if they try to do it again outside the house. Midiam is mentally surprised that this man is different from what they say about him, and she cannot believe that it is the same man in front of her. Azzedine demands that they apologize for their behavior, because if they want something from him, they must first show respect. Midiam realizes that she is not in the best position, and Azzedine asks her again whose side she is on. After this, she tells him that she apologizes to him for being rude to the herald and declares that she is his ally. Azzedine looks at her completely dispassionately and says that he accepts her apology. After this, he warns her not to shoot anyone unless he has the intention of killing someone, and that she shouldn't play with guns. Turning around, he says that he will not tell anyone what happened here and recommends that they return. Suddenly, he decides to change his mind, at least for a little while, and asks if they have some water to quench their thirst. Midiam becomes even more determined and challenges him to a duel, but Ismail tries to dissuade her. He claims that this man is very dangerous and should not be trifled with by challenging him to a fight. Midiam notes that Azzedine is different from what was said about him, but she will not be able to avoid a duel because that would be cowardice. After this, she again declares that she is officially challenging him to seize his position as herald. Azzedine listens to her proposal in silence, while Ismail is very upset that she decided to fight him. Azzedine scratches his head and notes that, apparently, Ariel is a very bad influence on these children she taught. He asks her if she has any idea what will happen if she wins. Azzedine reflects that Ariel is only part of the problem, and the main problem is that he is underestimated. He advises her to give up before it's too late, adding that just because Ariel can defeat him doesn't mean an apprentice can. Instead of giving a normal response, Midiam simply turns around and moves away to a respectful distance, not letting him out of sight. After this, she states that there are now exactly 100 steps between them, repeating that she is challenging him. An owl flying in the sky confirms the duel and demands that Azzedine accept the challenge. Midiam looks up in surprise and sees this bird, calling it the mouth of the emperor. Azzedine takes a more relaxed approach and asks the bird if she is serious about accepting this challenge. Ismail feels himself becoming more and more uneasy with every second he spends in this company. The whole point is that this bird is a spirit that visits every herald, and if it confirms a duel, one cannot refuse the challenge. Looking around, he realizes that the situation is escalating and now they will have to fight each other. Midiam maintains a self-confidence whose origin is unclear and declares that she simply must win. After some time, the duel comes to an end, and Azzedine drinks a large flask of water with pleasure. Ismail watches what is happening with complete bewilderment and tries to understand what is happening here given the recent events. The whole point is that Azzedine accepted the challenge to a duel and used an archery technique worthy of a true warrior. It was Aragas's unique technique that he decided to use to win the duel. Midiam faces difficulties almost from the very beginning, as she did not expect how strong her opponent was. Azzedine is at a distance and shoots at her with simple stones that are not even real arrows. Midiam tries to repel these attacks with her magical abilities, but she finds it difficult. At one point, one of the stones slipped past her hair, catching it and tearing out several locks. Ismail is sure that Azzedine cannot use magic, but in this duel he demonstrated the yellow crane technique. This is not the only thing he managed to surprise the apprentices with, who clearly did not expect to face such a strong opponent. At a certain point, Midiam decides that the time has come to attack, as she has found a good window of opportunity. Finding him next to a pile of stones, she realizes that her prediction came true and he really was there. She moves forward, believing that she has finally caught Azzedine, and now his defeat is only a matter of time. Anticipating the strike, she rushes forward to deliver a swift and wide lunge with her sharp sword. However, it turns out that Azzedine's body is incredibly light and seems to dissolve from the slightest blow. Thus, from the outside, it seems as if it is impossible to cause physical harm to him, no matter how hard you try. Suddenly, Midiam appears from behind, already confident that she could deal with this elusive warrior. She instinctively turns towards him to create a magical barrier and not be harmed by further blows. However, Azzedine lunges forward and grabs her hand, preventing her from casting the spell, and then prepares to end the duel. Accumulating a large amount of strength in his hands, he declares that now everything is definitely over. Midiam doesn't have time to dodge and is thrown several meters to the side by the blow, creating a large crater and crashing into a rock. Ismail begins to get angry, trying to understand how the descendant of a traitor dares to do this to the descendants of the noblest blood. He calls him a pathetic bastard and rushes forward, claiming that such behavior is inexcusable. Azadin doesn't move when suddenly an owl, watching what is happening, loudly announces that the duel is over. The owl reports that Midiam challenged Azadin to a duel and lost, and now her fate is entirely in his hands. She also says that Ismail is also Azadin's property because he treacherously intervened. Midiam understands that now she has no choice but to quickly commit suicide, so as not to become someone's property. However, Azadin quickly throws a stone to knock the knife out of her hands and prevent something irreparable. He states that he assumed she would take such a step if she inevitably lost the duel. Midiam falls to her knees, realizing that she is now completely powerless against her opponent. Azadin declares that those who lose a duel do not even have the right to die, and now she cannot die until he allows it or dies himself. He asks her if she really decided to challenge him, despite the obvious consequences. A smile briefly appears on his face. He realizes that in front of him is a real child who has not weighed his chances. Having finished drinking from the flask, he throws it towards Ismail so that he can catch it and put it away for himself. Looking at them, he declares that this is enough for the lesson, and now they are free to go back to their homes. Ismail and Midiam look at him in surprise, trying to understand what this all means and why he is refusing them. Azadin recommends pretending that yes or no, as it would be unsafe if such information were included in their recommendations. This really makes them quite surprised, as such behavior is highly untypical for a herald. Azadin, as if nothing had happened, turns around and begins to go about his business, but they continue to follow him. He reminds them that he has no need of slaves since he has freed them, so they should return back to their sanctuary. Midiam asks him why, having received a beautiful and trained girl as a slave, he so easily refuses her. Azadin says that he knows nothing about her beauty, but if she were as talented as Ariel, she would not have lost. He also notes that the world is full of men who are attracted to young women, and there are many cultures where early marriage is permitted. He advises her to live a normal life and not to invite anyone to participate in stupid duels anymore. Ismail is surprised that this man turned out to be much more talkative than he initially thought, but at the same time he seemed to be worried about them. Ismail also notices that his comrade is behaving very atypically, despite the fact that she continues to be humiliated. Suddenly, genuine affection and obsession flash in her eyes, and she notes that this is something new. The contract of service is that the Emperor and the Aragas give each other what is required of them, but the traitor faces a terrible death. The contract, which was once a symbol of loyalty and honor, became a symbol of a terrible curse after the death of the Emperor. He created an endless cycle of subjugation and showed signs of destruction. This oath began to take effect when the Herald clan intervened in the battle for the throne of Terrazar. One of the warriors won this battle and received a copy of the Divine King's book, but a traitor stole this book. This traitor's name was Acre. He was caught quite quickly and imprisoned in cruel captivity. He was kept in inhumane conditions, but this was the punishment for betrayal, which could not be left unpunished. He was told to return everything he stole, and if he couldn't, the curse would kill him. They also demanded that he hand over a copy of the Divine King's book, otherwise he would face the most terrible torment in his life. The clan threatened him with every possible and unimaginable means of reprisal, but in the end, all hope of salvation disappeared completely. The reason for this is that Acre tore the book apart in the heart of the world's mountain range. This moment can be characterized as the starting point after which a person became the first victim of the contract curse. Because of this curse, he gave birth to twins, despite being biologically male. These twins were Azadin and Ariel, who were brother and sister, practically twins. Of the two, Ariel became the strongest hero in the clan's history and brought it legendary fame. At the same time, Azadin was proclaimed a pathetic idiot, incapable of anything but crying. Midiam watches Azadin and tries to understand where these rumors came from if he doesn't look like that person at all. Azadin continues to move on, stating that he has already made it clear to them that he does not need assistance. Midiam states that she is not following him at all, and that they are following each other only because they need to deliver a letter. Showing a small package, she says that it is a letter from the head of the Salasma region that needs to be delivered. Azadin hands over the letter and states that this old geezer has always disliked him and created problems for him. Azadin examines the letter and discovers that the heralds are aware of the existence of pages from this book that need to be retrieved. Azadin notes that the letter states that copies of the Divine King's book have recently begun to appear. Midiam states that she knows everything perfectly well since his father is to blame for all of this. Ismail instantly, with incredible force, steps on her foot to silence her and stop her from continuing to speak. Midiam asks him why he is acting like this, and Azadin praises him, saying that it seems like they both know about it. Annoyed, he notes that he will now have to drag himself to Salasma to greet the head of that region. Looking at his charges, he thanks them for deciding to give him the letter, as it turned out to be very useful to him. Midiam immediately smiles and says that in that case they can go together, because then she will be able to tell him everything. Azadin declares that this road does not belong to him, so if they want, they can follow him, and Midiam lovingly follows Azadin. After some time, they decide to make a stop and have a good rest to gain strength. The first to wake up is Azzedine, who stretches relaxedly and looks around to make sure they are safe. Immediately after this, he approaches his comrades and announces that it is time to wake up and hit the road. After a while, they prepare their mounts and rush forward. Midiam and Ismail are feeling very sleepy when they suddenly stop, hearing that Azzedine has found a cool stream. They immediately decide to replenish their water supplies and also wash themselves a little in order to give themselves even more energy. A few moments later, they hear strange cries, signaling that people are approaching them. A man who looks very much like a robber looks at them and asks who gave them permission to take water from their stream. Azzedine tries to handle the matter peacefully, stating that he has no intention of fighting them and asking what they want in return. The robber declares that they will take everything they have to keep them alive. Azzedine looks at them carefully and asks again if they would consider compromise, even as a last resort. The robber says that Azzedine talks too much for a grown man and asks why he needs a clown mask. After this, he gives the command that the women be taken alive and the men be slaughtered, since they are of no use. After several minutes of brutal carnage and several crippled comrades, the survivors beg for mercy. They say that they are innocent and are definitely not bandits who prey on the weak. These people claim that they are simply in France looking for some book at the request of the Margrave. Midiam suggests that this is just an excuse, but Azzedine points out that traders don't usually travel along this road. Midiam is worried and says that these scoundrels just need to be finished off by grabbing their sword. Azzedine immediately stops her and tells her that killing people without reason is a big mistake. Ismail doesn't understand this either, believing that killing them would be the right decision since there were already witnesses. Azzedine states that he is not going to kill people just because they are inconvenient, and they are happy about it. One of the desperate peasants says that he and his family will be rewarded doubly for his incredible mercy. Azzedine suddenly becomes even more stern and orders him to shut up immediately before it's too late. Ismail reflects that he has often seen people who do not want to kill, but he has never seen a herald with such thoughts. Suddenly, Azzedine delivers a powerful blow to the face of one of the captives, which greatly surprises Ismail. Azzedine explains that it was a precise blow that could take out an eye, noting that he had practiced it many times. He advises the survivors not to twitch, stating that otherwise they could lose all face. They ask him if he has changed his mind about sparing them, but Azzedine declares that he will fulfill his promise in full. Approaching them, he informs them that only in the evening can a person be forced to renounce violence. Midiam observes this cruel punishment procedure and believes that in principle, such a punishment is quite fair. The owl also does not dare to object to the actions of his partner, since Azzedine is free to do as he sees fit. After some time, the beaten and maimed peasants begin to wander through the forest, saying that now they will not have children. One of the most exceptional ones says that if he ever comes across a person again, he will kill him. However, after a few moments, a strange hand appears out of nowhere and falls on his head. Not a moment passes before all that remains of his head is a bloody mess, which begins to splatter in a horrific manner. The giant ogre, who somehow managed to sneak up on them unnoticed, grabs the remaining villagers, calling them food. He throws them into the basket and announces that very soon they will finally have a real meal. He also grabs another survivor and throws him into the basket, saying that he now belongs to the ogre. It's already a mangled body and there are no police, so he allows the goblins to refresh themselves and regain their strength. Gradually he moves further and sees before him a gigantic city, probably filled with people. The giant ogre, consumed by greed, joyfully says that there will be a huge amount of fresh meat in this village. Meanwhile, Azzedine and his comrades continue their wanderings, rushing forward. Midiam decides to discuss what happened recently and reveals that she initially thought he was being too lenient. Afterwards, she states that this is not a bad approach, since they even got some weapons this way. Azzedine explains that it is very difficult to understand those whose skins we have never touched, since we do not know their feelings. He adds that losing an eye is more than just an injury, as the consequences of the blow are deeper than they seem at first glance. From their point of view, they have now been to the school of victims who can only fear, and this is a good chance to repent for what they have done. Ismail listens carefully to his comrade's thoughts and thinks that it sounds very reasonable and interesting. Looking at the sky, he is further convinced that he even spared people and gave them a chance to improve. Dismounting from his horse, he reports that the conversation between them had left him a little tense. Ismail asks what this is about, and Azzedine reminds him that the peasant said that the Margrave is looking for a copy of the Book of the Divine King. Ismail notes that this is strange, since the Margrave has long been behind in the race for the throne, and is apparently trying to improve his chances with the help of magic. Azzedine, looking bored, states that political figures are always obsessed with power, which means he needs to disguise himself. With these words, he removes his mask, explaining that these are precautionary measures while they are on the Count's territory. Ismail and Midiam look at their interlocutor in surprise, and emotions of horror appear on their faces. The thing is that instead of eyes, Azzedine only has a scar, applied over an empty space. Azzedine dons a small cloak to disguise his form, again revealing that he never had eyes. Ismail asks how he doesn't trip if he can't see anything, to which Azzedine replies that he has been able to navigate without eyes since birth. Midiam moves closer to check if this is really the case, and Azzedine tracks her every move. Azzedine asks why she is so surprised and encourages her to speak if there is anything she wants to say. After a short pause, Midiam says that in this situation, the scars even adorn him. She adds that he was a handsome man until an accident occurred that left him with no eyes. Azzedine, with a little offense in his voice, says that these words were spoken to him by the same Ariel who inflicted wounds on him. Midiam asks who it was, and Azzedine states that it was his sister Ariel. He remembers her words about how strange it is not to have what nature intended, and now he can imagine that he once had eyes. Azzedine explains with a clear conscience that thanks to this he was able to successfully pretend to be blind. Midiam asks if they should play along by pretending he is blind, but Azzedine states that there is no need for that. After some time, a huge city appears before them, which looks quite well fortified. By sunset, they reach the main gate, where guards check everyone very carefully before letting them in. Ismail notices the gates, but notes that the line to them is quite long, and it is unknown how much longer he will have to wait. Midiam says it's a very important transport hub, but Azzedine claims he's just a pilgrim who picked up the children. After some time, he realizes that something is wrong here and decides to consult with his comrades. Turning to Ismail, calling him Puppy Eyes, he asks what is going on here. He notices how the guards treat ordinary people and wonders how long this has been the case here. From the outside, it appears that looting is rampant here, as guards rob anyone who tries to get inside. The unfortunate man who tried to enter the city is forced to pay with goods and humiliation. Midiam considers such behavior unacceptable, and Ismail adds that he does not remember this happening before. Azzedine nods briefly and mentally comes to the conclusion that the guards are carefully searching for something. A man approaches him and asks him if he is blind, to which Azzedine states that he is accompanied by orphans. The man sympathizes with the fact that such a life must be difficult, but Azzedine changes the subject. He asks what's going on here, and the man says it's all because of rumors about the pages of the Divine King's book. The man adds that a real hunt has begun for them, and the Margrave's offspring are prowling everywhere, turning everything upside down. Being the owner of one of these pages, he understands that such a misunderstanding will not be easy to resolve. The merchant asks the guards why they are taking his money since they were looking for the book of the Divine King. The corrupt guard turns around, hits him with an armored gauntlet and orders him not to come closer. Unable to withstand the force of the blow, the merchant falls to the ground, unable to get up. The guard explains with a grin that the grimoire can take many forms, and it probably took the form of money. The unfortunate man's daughter steps forward and declares that stealing is wrong and demands that they give them the money. However, the guards move closer to them to prevent her from behaving so boldly. With a fist-shaking gesture, they declare that any objections must be strictly suppressed. The merchant hugs his daughter and says that she cannot threaten the child because it would be violence. The guard comes up and hits the merchant in the chest, telling him to shut up and stay out of their sight. The daughter looks at her father in fear and tries to help him recover from such injuries, while the father tries to cough. Midiam quickly becomes enraged by this behavior and calls the guards crazy and abnormal. Ismail asks what they should do, and Midiam immediately suggests engaging in battle, but Azzedine stops them. One of the people, who looks like a scout, approaches the guard to talk to him for a bit. He tells the guard something very important, and apparently very frightening, which immediately makes the guard nervous. Azzedine, possessing incredible hearing, decides to eavesdrop on what these two are talking about. The remaining scouts who were nearby immediately began to fuss and run towards the castle. Ordinary people who don't hear anything are wondering what's going on and why these people decided to pack their things. Azzedine explains to these unfortunates that they are only behaving this way because they noticed several ogres nearby. After a few more minutes, it becomes clear that these people plan to close the gates and leave everyone else to their fate. People rush to the gates and loudly ask for them to be opened, declaring that an agreement can be reached, but no one answers. After some time, the main part of the forces that were in this town leaves it along with supplies. These are armed groups commanded by Targai, the bastard of the Margrave of these lands. Targai asks his subordinates if they close the gates carefully and receives the answer that they tried not to let anyone through. Another aristocrat who thinks he is too important is about to run away when suddenly another soldier approaches him. The soldier asks what they should do, since he is one of those who will defend the village. Targai irritably explains that the plan is to fight off enemies if they get too close. He also states that they were trained for just such occasions, without mentioning that the training lasted only one day. One of the knights suggests letting the rest of the people go so that it would be easier to command the defense. Targai, with a sly smile, informs that in this case, responsibility for the defense of the settlement falls on his shoulders. After this, he leaves with his guards, leaving the man alone with his thoughts. Looking around, he realizes that the monsters are approaching, as the ground itself is already beginning to shake. One of the bandits encountered and shot down by Azzedine is still alive, in a basket among the corpses. He decides to watch to find out where they are and where they are being dragged. Before his eyes appears a whole horde of goblins, who follow the giant ogre and follow his orders. The ogre himself joyfully chants the word meat to encourage his warriors to go further and ravage the villages. Along the way, they set fire to forests to deprive their victims of the chance to hide among the foliage. This is quickly noticed by ordinary residents and observers on watchtowers and observation towers. Ordinary people have no choice but to leave as quickly as possible, leaving the town to its fate. After some time, the residents hastily evacuate to avoid becoming victims of the approaching ogres. One of the girls turns around to check if all the refugees walking behind are doing well. Approaching the heroes, she informs them that the road will only become more difficult from now on, so it is better to prepare properly. She hands Ismail a spare lantern, explaining that it will help him guide his uncle and sister well. Ismail thanks her and says that he will take good care of his relatives, so there is no need to worry about it. Azzedine hears all this and realizes that people are much friendlier when he pretends to be a blind man. He recalls the words of some of the city's defenders, who reported that the knights and mercenaries had fled. He also notes that they need to protect the village, so they need to gather those who can fight and fight back. He speaks to residents and states that any help can be useful before it is too late. The same merchant who had a hard time because of the guards says that he will protect his daughter. Azzedine pauses for a moment to reflect and realizes that the residents' chances are very slim. Midiam notes that she simply cannot believe that the knights, who are supposed to serve the people, drove them away. Azzedine says it was a shame, but it bought them time and gave people a chance to get away. Midiam thinks that this makes sense, but she finds it strange that the Araga sympathize with people. Azzedine doesn't see anything strange in this and says that he fully agrees with them. After this, he decides to use one of his skills and recommends that his comrades split up for a while. Before they can even figure out what's happening, there's no trace of him left except a small stick that has fallen onto the rocks. Meanwhile, we are transported to a night fortress, which is about to face huge hordes of monsters. The peasants inside, armed with ordinary pikes and bows, are preparing to repel a serious attack. After some time, the real horror in the form of giant green-skinned creatures appears at the walls. A giant ogre calling himself Gold looks at the defenders like they're a big plate of goodies. He then places a giant basket on the ground with a bang, revealing a human hand sticking out of it. He reports that they have a lot of meat that will take a long time to eat, so they will need a village to organize a feast. Immediately after this, he prepares to cause a small earthquake to force the people to surrender. The fortress commander reports that the giant ogre is their leader, so it's best to focus on him. Moments later, the defenders fire their bows to rain arrows down on the enemy. However, most goblins hide behind shields, or their skin is too thick to be pierced. A goblin mage, hiding behind a giant basket, commands his comrades to break through the human defenses. After this, his allies rush forward, hoping for glorious booty and plenty of food in the city. The fortress commandant gives the order to defend the gates at any cost and shoot at anyone who approaches. The goblins act in a coordinated manner, which allows them to achieve some tactical success in storming the castle. Some of them manage to reach the giant walls and approach the wooden gates, which are not properly reinforced. While a small squad tries to break down the wooden gates with their axes, a giant ogre grabs a huge boulder. Taking careful aim, he throws the stone towards the gate to weaken it even more. On the other side, people are trying to hold the gate to prevent a breakthrough of the defense. The fortress commandant understands that this is their last chance to fight off the enemy and orders them to shoot as accurately as possible. Yesterday's merchant hopes that his daughter managed to run far away, and when the ogre goes after her, he will not be able to catch up with her. Meanwhile, the goblin, at a safe distance, prepares to cast a spell. Suddenly, the staff he is holding begins to behave strangely, as if coming back to life. The goblin happily reports that the stick responded, meaning the Divine King's book is somewhere nearby. Before he can finish speaking, Azzedine appears from the darkness and delivers a powerful kick right to his face. The ogre, meanwhile, grabs another cobblestone to hit the archers, who are not protected in any way. At the last moment, they realize the size of the projectile and that they have no way to dodge. Azzedine comes to the rescue, grabs them by their clothes, and evacuates them to a safe place. If he had been even a split second late, these people would have faced certain death. He addresses the defenders of the fortress and informs them that he will help them in their difficult task. The commandant of the fortress looks at him in surprise and asks in a trembling voice who he is. Azzedine removes his belt, makes a makeshift bow, and explains that he is the Emperor's herald. This information surprises the defenders of the fortress, who did not expect help from such a creature. He doesn't specify whether Azzedine is one of the Herald clan and is already jumping down to join the fight. The first thing he does is fire 2 quick shots aimed at the giant ogre's eyes. The shots hit their target, and the ogre loses his sight, becoming blind, but no less dangerous. The huge creature becomes enraged and begins to destroy everything around it, including its comrades. Azzedine lands on his head to control the monster, which strikes in random directions. Within moments, the ogre is causing more damage to his own troops than to the enemy. Azzedine is mentally glad that everything is going according to plan and decides to continue acting in this vein. Meanwhile, he constantly shoots back at the approaching goblins, hitting them in the head. The commandant of the fortress, observing this, does not hide his surprise that such a warrior has taken their side. Azzedine notices a strange phenomenon. The basket the goblin was trying to reach begins to move. Looking closer, he sees the bandit he had recently released after injuring him. Suddenly, the goblin, unconscious moments ago, rises to his feet and begins to mutate. He joyfully reports that the Book of the Divine King has responded to his call. He then proclaims himself the new King of Fangs, and his hands begin to rapidly transform into something horrific. The same thing happens to his body, and with a cry for power over his fangs, he summons a strange creature. The creature that emerges from the goblin's hand suddenly cuts off his head and swallows it. Azzedine observes this strange creature and wonders what this phenomenon is and where it came from. Noticing the mutating mass of internal organs and teeth, he realizes that this is already a serious threat. The creature begins to grow uncontrollably and sends out tentacles in different directions, destroying everything in its path. At a certain point, the creature's target becomes Azadin, or the ogre it is riding. Azadin manages to jump aside in time, and the giant worm grabs the ogre with its sharp teeth. After this, he begins to pull the ogre towards himself, while the ogre loudly screams that he is in great pain. His final thoughts are that he loves to eat, but being eaten does not give him joy. After a few moments, eerie, disgusting sounds are heard, as if the creature is digesting and chewing something. Gradually, the strange creature grows in size, and the defenders of the fortress wonder what it is. Azadin has encountered something similar before, and explains that it is a creature of the divine cult called the King of Fangs. After some time, another figure resembling a goblin appears next to this creature. This mage is indeed resurrected in a new form, but now he is stronger than before. He releases a strange beam that rushes through space and stops near Azadin's chest. Azadin puts his hand to the body and realizes that he was not injured, but the location of the page was revealed. Ivan the Terrible's pancake informed him that he must hand over the page of the Divine King in order to die quickly and painlessly. Before he can finish speaking, an arrow flies past his face, which would have hit just a few centimeters to the left. Azadin decides not to stand on ceremony with such creatures so that they make more mistakes. This instantly inflates the goblin's sense of self-importance, and he asks Azadin how he dared to do such a thing. Azadin, meanwhile, wonders what this ray of light is and how it can point to the pages of the Divine King's book. The Fang King goes berserk and tries to capture and devour Azadin, but he is too slow. Azadin cannot understand why such a creature would need the book of the Divine King. He continues his war dance between the ranks of enemies to destroy them with the fearsome blows of the King of Fangs. Some goblins fall victim to the acidic spit that the giant creature uses to try and reach its enemy. The goblin mage calls this incredible impudence and again tries to reach Azadin with his new limbs. Azadin calmly jumps aside without even using superhuman strength. At a certain point, he makes a powerful throw to pin one limb to the ground and prevent it from moving. Reaching it, he draws his sword and cuts off a small part to test his theory. After this, he strikes one after another to weaken the opponent and cut off his fangs. Azadin comments on his actions by saying that the fangs are too big for such a carcass. These fangs contain poison that can be used to poison everyone around. Looking at the teeth, he notes that the fangs, without long roots, are easy to pull out and do not pose a threat. The goblin becomes enraged and orders Azadin to shut up, claiming he is speaking to the King of Fangs. Azadin smiles and says that in front of him is a pathetic imitation of the King of Fangs, who does not know how to behave. With these words, he rushes forward to deliver a few more blows and chop off the Fang King's limbs. Over time, he notices that a small amount of poison remains on his sword, which is trying to corrode the metal. He decides to get rid of the sword since it does not belong to him, and the power of the poison is impressive. The King of Fangs goes on another offensive and orders Azadin to die, making several quick attacks. Azadin dodges, thinking that it's frustrating to try so hard and the target won't even give a gold coin. A few moments later, a huge number of arrows fly past his body on the command of the fortress commandant. The arrows force the Fang King to pause briefly to shield his body from danger. The fortress commandant says that the herald must be helped in every possible way. Defenders point out that this is not the best idea, as the church could persecute them for what they did. The commandant loudly objects that the damned church did not help them when it was needed. He asks his comrades who among them will have the courage to condemn them for what they have done. One of the defenders with a bow finishes another shot and says that he would not like to die here. He advises his companions to think about it differently, as they are simply attacking the monster and the herald is passing by. The other defenders like this idea and decide to join in helping the strange creature. Sincerely or not, they fire a multitude of arrows towards the monster, which pleases Azadin. The King of Fangs carefully defends himself against arrows that do not cause serious damage. Azadin smiles and thinks that the people could have simply given him the arrows to make the task easier. He stretches his joints a bit and says it's time to get into the fight for real. Afterwards, he picks up a small fang that was cut off from the Fang King and throws it towards the huge pile of flesh. After seeing the amount of damage this projectile can cause, he comments that it is an excellent projectile. With these words, he quickly gathers his other fangs and with maximum effort sends them towards the wall of flesh. The King of Fangs, feeling incredible willpower, asks how pathetic humans can attack him. Azadin explains that these are just his teeth, and he is returning to the owner what he recently lost. The goblin, in desperation, declares that he will become the King of Fangs, and then rise to the title of Divine King in this hierarchy. Azadin pays no attention to this empty chatter, and says that he has heard such speeches many times already. A few moments later, he throws a rock towards the goblin, hitting him square in the head and silencing him forever. After this, he claims that he is a destroyer of holiness, so he is just doing his job. Taking another tooth, he launches it in a surprising trajectory that cuts off the goblin's head entirely. After a few moments, the small green head falls to the ground with a dull thud and bounces several times. For a few moments, the goblin remains conscious to watch his own downfall. The giant wall of flesh begins to crumble, and he finally goes to the next world. Azadin bends over the small scepter, realizing that it is the cause of the strange metamorphoses. Suddenly, he hears the defenders of the fortress calling him a heartless apostate and demanding his attention. Turning around, he sees that several peasants are already preparing to shoot arrows at him, but the commandant ordered him to wait. Azadin puts the staff away in a safe place, thinking that shooting at them now would be a big mistake. The commandant asks him what he was planning and why he killed these monsters, since no one asked him to do so. Other peasants claim that it was this man who brought them here, expressing confidence that the herald wanted to harm them. They note that these monsters appeared out of nowhere, and their appearance can be considered strange, to say the least. People quickly come to the conclusion that the terrible atheist who brought this fate upon them is to blame for everything. This is far from the first or even the 10th time that Azzedine has had to hear such words addressed to him, because no one likes people like him. Azzedine bears all these insults with a fortitude worthy of the finest warriors this planet has ever seen. However, he decides not to take the situation too seriously and says that he himself does not know how and why he ended up here. He asks the peasant if he knows that heralds perform their duty only for imperial gold coins. As if nothing had happened, he tells them that someone simply used one coin to help them in this battle. The commandant asks if someone really gave a wish to the herald for a gold coin. Suspicious whispers begin among the defenders to understand who could have called the herald here. One of the defenders asks the protagonist whether this wish was made by someone present or from outside. Azzedine replies that he cannot and is not obligated to disclose this information since it is a commercial secret. After this, he says that his task is completed and he can calmly go about his business. He also asks them if they want to leave their service for the sake of the royal church. He reminds them that the patron of noble blood who was responsible for them fled at the first opportunity. The defenders of the fortress understand that there is some truth in Azzedine's words, but they still forbid him to entrust their faith to them. Azzedine, having been in such situations 1,000 times, declares that he unconditionally respects the faith of any person on earth. Meanwhile, one of the robbers climbs out of the basket and looks around in the hope that it's all over. Tears of horror appear on his face, and he hopes that this time no monster will attack him. However, Azzedine quickly catches up with him, and the bandit falls back, emitting loud, frightened cries. Azzedine smiles and says that one needs to be kinder since one has a second chance to start life anew. The crippled bandit begins to cry, realizing that he will never again step on the slippery slope. Azzedine suddenly takes off, heading towards the fortress he had just helped defend. A few moments later, he finds himself on the walls of the fortress, to the surprise of the defenders. The commandant orders everyone to be careful and under no circumstances to shoot at him. Azzedine approaches the large quiver that the defenders use to replenish their ammunition. He asks the defenders if they would mind if he took some of the arrows they had used in the battle. The commandant nods silently and thanks Azzedine for his help at a crucial moment. Azzedine jumps down, thinking that if the zealot of the faith heard him, punishment would be inevitable. After some time, he leaves the vicinity of the fortress and goes into the forest from where he came. With swift and powerful steps, he moves at incredible speed, while remaining completely silent. The spiritual owl is surprised that he lied without batting an eye when he tried to fool these Christians with stories about the gold coin. Azzedine explains that this was necessary. Otherwise, they would suffer for their stupidity until the end of their days and work off their debt to him. The owl asks him if he is angry that he defeated the monster in front of the peasants, and they treated him ungratefully. Azzedine says that humans are weak, but they were also nice when he pretended to be blind, so they deserve his gratitude. He admits that these nightly forays are very tiring for him, and it wouldn't hurt him to get a good rest. He reflects on the fact that he has come all this way in vain and still hasn't received any coins, and this makes him a little upset. However, after a while, he sees familiar lights and rushes towards them to get to them. Taking a closer look, he realizes that these are indeed the same children he picked up a few days ago. Ismail looks happily towards Azzedine and declares that he is very glad to finally meet him again. After some time, they learn firsthand about what happened and are surprised that Azzedine defeated the impersonator of the cult king. Azzedine says that it was not a difficult task since the creature did not possess great strength. Ismail listens attentively to the story, after which his face suddenly becomes very sad. He says that his strength was spent and he received no coins, but Azzedine claims that helping other people is wonderful. Disguised as a simple wanderer, he says that life without something beautiful will be incredibly boring. Midiam happily declares that she has always thought so, and Ismail is simply a very boring and nerdy nerd. Azzedine says that they seem to have gotten out successfully and asks if the people really just let them go. Midiam states that they were initially discouraged, but they insisted that they could handle the smaller monsters. The young girl immediately begins to boast that they believed her only because she is incredibly beautiful. Azzedine questions this fact, saying that she is just a child. But Midiam states that she is an adult since she is already 13. Azzedine decides not to pursue the matter further, shows her the staff and asks if she can tell him what it is. Midiam carefully examines the magical staff, and Azzedine explains that this artifact was in the possession of a copycat cult. Midiam says that to conduct a full-fledged study she will have to work hard, as she is currently completely exhausted. After this, she happily asks if this means that he accepts her as his assistant. Azzedine says that he would not go that far, but Midiam immediately declares that he wants to receive one more favor in return. Azzedine agrees, and tomorrow she must look at the weapon, after which he jumps into the air. He climbs a huge tree to carefully examine the surroundings. Midiam asks what he is doing, and he states that he must hurry, so she should follow him immediately. Midiam asks where they are going, unaware that their travel route has not changed much. The thing is that Azzedine once again decided to break through to the group of peasants who had been trying to escape all this time. The girl who had previously helped Azzedine and his friends suddenly notices strange sounds and turns around. Seeing Azadin, she asks how he ended up there, not imagining that a blind man could have caught up with them. She also says that the children went looking for them a few hours ago and have not seen them since. Azadin says that he has lost his way a little, but the children are very smart and will catch up with him very soon. He also tells the other refugees that the sounds of victory shots are coming from the direction of the village. They ask what happened, and he states that he has very good hearing and recommends that they return to the village. He asks if they can signal with flashlights or some other way. Before they can do anything, one of the more eagle-eyed refugees points out to the others to look at it. Pointing to the lanterns on the fortress gates, he says that the village's defenders have indeed succeeded. This brings optimism to the hearts of all those present, as they had no longer hoped to meet their loved ones. Azadin advises sending a small team to check, after which the woman thanks him and turns around. However, upon closer inspection, she discovers that there is no one else in the place where the blind man stood. Azadin rushes back to his comrades so as not to attract unnecessary attention. He says that he really doesn't want to do this and that he might fall asleep if he lays down for even a second. A few moments later, he sees a strange smoke and decides to check the situation to understand what is happening. This smoke belongs to the camp where the knights are located, who have been in the village all this time. One of the guards reports that the place is suffering from drought and invasions, and the Margrave cares only about his book. His colleague says that all they have to do is do their job and get out of here with the money. Azadin suggests keeping an eye on this camp, realizing that these cowardly bastards have fled and abandoned their people. He decides to take a closer look at the camp to see if there are any interesting things he could borrow. He discovers a large quantity of stolen items that could be sold for a very substantial sum. Thoughts creep into his head that right now he is broke and could use some small financial income. The owl unconditionally and almost instantly supports his plans, saying that this is a real jackpot. Azadin understands that traveling is quite an expensive undertaking, so he could use some money. The next morning, most of the inhabitants of this camp are awakened by the loud screeching of Targa. He asks the others how it happened that all the supplies were stolen and none of them even had time to lift a finger. The guards try to justify themselves, saying that they were attacked so quickly that they did not have time to come to their senses. Targi turns to the sullen guard and asks how long he will remain silent, since it was his responsibility. He declares that he admits guilt if insisted on, and continues to eat the apple. After this, Targi declares that he will cut the pay of 2 guards and asks if there will be any objections. The grim guard says he doesn't care, but his thing is also missing, and this thief was clearly no ordinary one. Targi asks him what was stolen from him, to which the sullen man with the scar replies that he cannot divulge the secret. Targi says that in that case, it was some kind of unimportant thing, and decides to continue his travels. The scarred guard says that this petty thief will probably settle in the nearest settlement, which means he needs to be searched. Targi notes that the nearest settlement is ruled by other aristocrats, and this will be quite difficult. He also asks the giant why he should carry out these orders, since he will not obey a simple blockhead. A vile and creepy smile spreads across the giant's face, and he says that in that case he will take a different path. He immediately makes a promise that he will turn this place upside down in the name of Targa, so as not to waste time. At that very moment, someone thrusts a knife into the man's body, causing him to flinch from the unexpected but painful blow. Targi looks at his wound and calls his opponent a pathetic bastard who dared to raise his hand against an aristocrat. The other guards approach the captain and ask what happened and how he feels. The grim man says there is nothing to be afraid of here, because Targi will definitely not die right now. He also states that the blade is a gift from a witch, after which a strange energy appears around it. Looking at the blade, Targi sees that it has instantly transformed into a giant spider that looks disgusting. However, this strange creature rushes forward, breaking through the wounds inflicted by the blade. Targi is frightened and asks where the spider has gone, hoping that it can be quickly extracted and destroyed. The mysterious warrior says that there is nothing to worry about, because now the feeling is absolutely normal. Targi angrily lowers his weapon and asks his opponent what kind of nonsense he just did. However, after some time, his body begins to be burned by incredible attacks of pain that were not there just a second ago. Unable to resist these cruel urges, he falls to the ground, clutching his wound. The warrior advises him to relax, saying that inside he is just starting to feel a little tingly. He also advises to obey his orders from now on, otherwise the spider will start laying eggs in Targa's body. He adds that once the eggs hatch, the outcome will be unpleasant, and Targi asks what he should do. The other guards just silently watch what is happening, not understanding what they should do in such a situation. The warrior simply places his hand on Targa's shoulder, hinting that he should listen to him carefully. Smiling disgustingly again, he says that he will now plunder the village and catch the little rat who stole his things. Targi understands that he is in a very difficult situation, but it is difficult to sympathize with him after what he did. Meanwhile, Midian and Ishmael continue to sleep peacefully, having not been disturbed by anything all night. The owl, watching them closely, says that it is already early morning and they need to wake up. Midian and Ismail reluctantly comply with the bird's demands, stretching cautiously to regain their composure. Midian looks around sleepily to find out where Azzedine is. She's surprised to find that her friend is already awake despite the early hour. She also sees that he has two staffs in his hands, despite the fact that yesterday he only brought one. Azzedine says that yesterday he searched the mercenary camp and found another staff, which he decided to borrow. Looking at it closely, Midian notices that the staff looks the same as the one the goblin had. Ismail intercepts the artifact, saying that he must be the first to examine it in case it turns out to be cursed. Without thinking twice, he uses a special skill to understand the true nature of the staff and find out what it is used for. Azzedine looks at him expectantly and asks what he sees, immersed in the aura of the artifact. Ismail says he sees an astral image in black and green tones, which seems a little strange to him. Azzedine states that if it were the Fang King's item, the image would be red, meaning the staff belongs to a different cult. Ismail agrees, saying that the staff has a very specific purpose. After a short pause, he explains that all these wands are needed to find certain things. Ismail adds that the staff points to something, but it is quite fragile and can easily break. He also emphasizes that the creator of the staff is clearly not a small fry, and despite the fact that the artifacts were created in a hurry, he is still powerful. Azzedine realizes that the item is needed to track copies of the Divine King's book, and now he has more problems. After this, he tells his allies that they need to take a closer look at the owners of these items. We are transported back to the camp where the warriors, led by Targi, who has now become a small fry of some monster, have stopped. Azzedine watches them closely from a tree and says that all this is starting to bore him. By carefully observing people's behavior, he realizes that the atmosphere has changed greatly overnight. He quickly figures out that the men are servicing their equipment to prepare for battle. He suggests that they are targeting the pages of the royal book and want to take them by force from anyone who might possess them. Azzedine expected them to do something after losing the staff, but he didn't expect them to start a real war. Midian and Ismail approach him cautiously and ask what he sees and what the situation is in the camp of the villains. Azzedine jumps down and reports that it looks like these guys are planning to attack the nearest village. Ismail says the nearby village is much larger than the average one. Midian notes that one should not act recklessly, since such measures are usually taken only in hopeless situations. Azzedine calmly changes his clothes, after which he rushes forward, saying that in this situation anything is possible. He decides to hide the staff and the page for a while, so that he can use them at the right moment. Just an hour's journey later, they come across the very village that is soon to be attacked. They decide to go inside and quickly discover that the sun was already setting. There is no sign of trouble in this village, as the guards have no idea what a nightmare is about to befall them. Azzedine was able to get inside because the guard only advised him to move carefully, as it would not be easy for a blind man here. Midian wonders if they really let blind pilgrims through without asking a single question. Azzedine decides not to comment on this, and the children end up at the fair, which immediately makes their faces happy. Ismail discovers a trading wagon from a distant land, saying that they can finally rest. Azzedine looks around the fair that is taking place here, looking for something interesting and things that might be useful to him. He is surprised that the Khorazar Trade Association decided to look here, since now is not the best time. After this, he continues to follow his comrades so as not to stand out from the crowd. As a group of children look towards another child, she asks him if he is the junior herald. The fair-haired youth reveals that he is the child of a trader, and that in his place he would not dare to look up. However, Ariel, who was destined to become the clan's great genius, quickly hinted to them that they should not behave like that towards her. The young man then realized that in front of them was not just any girl, but a real treasure. Despite her cruelty, he found her nature impressive. It was then that this hopeless fool fell in love with her, realizing to his misfortune that she was more than just a strong personality. However, that was a long time ago, and now these are just memories that have become distorted over time. However, the fool's feelings still remained, and he cherished the hope of meeting her again. Suddenly he hears a strange noise and tries to figure out what is going on. To understand what caught his attention, we go back in time. It would be useful to know the history of the Khorazar Trade Association, as it plays an important role in this story. The association started out as a gathering of small traders, but they have now grown to become the largest organization. In fact, this organization is controlled by the heralds or the people of Aragas, who are gradually regaining their influence. All the association's traders actually belong to this family, even though they don't advertise it. Azadin understands that he needs to keep a low profile so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Suddenly, mocking voices are heard in their direction, asking who decided to come to them. Several young people wonder if this is the same famous 108 spirit, Sir Azadin. They ask him how the unfortunate hero has been doing over the past 3 months, but he doesn't answer them. Looking at these children, he notes that they even sent an apprentice to look after them. Azadin explains that these children are not his apprentices, and then asks for help with servicing his riding animals. One of them calmly takes the goat aside, saying that if Azadin asks them, he has no right to refuse. However, the others try to mock him, claiming that he is just a coward who couldn't even handle basic training. They also notice that he has a lot of things and assume that he must have stolen something. Ishmael states that he does not like this, and Midiam expresses anger that they do not respect the herald's status and their duty. Azadin says he needs to change his clothes, and a few moments later a woman's dress flies towards him. Azadin looks at the item they decided to give him, while his acquaintances begin to laugh loudly. Azadin asks if they haven't grown up yet, adding that he doesn't want to start a fight. They angrily ask him what he said, after which they declare that they are not obligated to serve him. Suddenly they hear Midiam's menacing voice, who says that if they are dissatisfied with something, they must resolve it with a duel. She comes closer to them and asks if they are afraid of the consequences of failure in this situation. A proud and excellent smile spreads across her face, and she declares that they are only chatting. Azadin looks at her in surprise and understands that she is the last person who should talk about the consequences of defeat. One of the bullies comes up to her and says that she's only saying that because she doesn't know that this guy can't take a punch. Midiam realizes that the time for talking has passed and suddenly rises into the air, to everyone's surprise. A few moments later, she lands on the neck of one of the villains, revealing a mountain of knives. He asks her what she is doing, and Midiam informs him that he doesn't seem to understand the situation he is in at all. She also claims that she is the heir of the Edal family, and that the pitiful servants dare not treat her with such disdain. After this, she asks if they have anything against Azadin, and orders them to back up their mockery with actions. She also says that no one is allowed to look down on a herald, as this means neglect of duty. Their squabble is accompanied by the sharp sounds of loud approaching bangs coming from one person. The young man says it looks like things are getting hot here, but he doesn't want to come to blows. Looking at the main character, he notes that they have not seen each other for a long time, and he is very glad to see him after a long separation. Azadin agrees that they really haven't seen each other for a long time. After this, the young man politely turns to Midiam and asks who she is, after which the girl calmly introduces herself. The young man says his name is Derek Savan and asks for forgiveness for the behavior of his subordinates, after which he asks them to stop. Midiam, without much enthusiasm, removes the knife from the scoundrel's throat and decides to listen to this man's advice. After a few moments, she jumps to the side, landing next to Azadin, who has not said a word during this time. The bully is clearly unhappy with what is happening and hopes that they can take revenge on this girl. Derek calmly addresses them by name and tells them to get on with their job duties. Coming closer to Azadin, he says that he should wash himself and return, offering to at least have dinner together. Azadin decides to take up the offer, and within a couple of hours, he feels like a completely different person. Ismail asks why he didn't say anything to these people since they shouldn't disrespect the heralds. He also reports that his sister punished anyone who disrespected her. Azadin dresses calmly and says that Ariel has always had a different approach, which he is not inclined to. Ismail cannot understand such mercy and notes that Azadin is indeed acting wisely. Azadin explains that this is precisely why Ismail must convince Midiam to go his own way and not get in his way. As he leaves the tent, he says that otherwise they will have to put up with his oddity so as not to ask questions. After a while, it's time for dinner, and Derek even lights a few candles to make eating more comfortable. After some time, Azadin suddenly catches himself thinking that he is being asked the same question as last time. Derek asks if he has heard anything about Ariel, and Azadin dryly replies that he knows nothing about her. Derek asks if he's worried about his older sister, but Azadin replies that given her skills, there's nothing to worry about. Derek begins to scold him, saying that he came here, started a fight with the association members and shouldn't have bothered with her. He quickly takes the basket of apples from him and says that it is time to talk about the results of his campaign. Azadin reports that he is doing a great job because he earns gold coins. Derek suggests that he attack another trade association to keep them in line, but Azadin states that he is not interested in that. After this, he takes out a magic staff and asks if he has seen anything like this before. Derek says that bishops and cults use these rods to search for pages of the Divine King's book. He also notes that these staves are a good catch, although it would be even better if he got a page or copies of the book. Azadin reaches for the apple and says that he has also come across similar pages, and he is the happy owner of such. Derek is very surprised to hear this and doesn't even have time to intercept his hand, which is reaching for the apple. Azadin asks with a smile if other heralds return here empty-handed. Derek immediately becomes even more serious and grabs his hand, emphasizing the dramatic nature of what is happening. He loudly demands that the fragments of the book be handed over to him immediately so that they can keep them. Azadin is surprised by such persistence, which appeared absolutely without any reason. Meanwhile, the fair continues to run as usual without any problems. Midiam and Ismael, along with other subordinates, calmly examine the goat, which is located near the main tent. Suddenly, they hear Derek's loud scream, very angry at his interlocutor, and they realize that something is wrong. Derek breathes with difficulty, feeling how the aggression does not allow him to think clearly and makes him even angrier. Azadin, in turn, behaves as if nothing had happened, as if he was not at all bothered by what was happening. Derek asks if he doesn't trust them, noting that they can protect the book fragment much better. Azadin states that there is no need for this, as it will cost him a lot of trouble that he will not be able to handle. He emphasizes that one of the Margrave's bastards is already rushing here with his mercenaries, and among them there is a cultist. Derek asks if he really thinks they can't handle them, pointing out that he is, after all, a former herald. Azadin says there's a problem with that, because suspicion will definitely arise if an ordinary merchant uses force. Derek states that it doesn't matter, as protecting the Divine King's book page is a priority. After this, he arrogantly points his finger at him and says that he is much weaker than Ariel, but Azadin notes that this was only the case in childhood. He recalls the harsh reality he faced growing up and says he was no match for it back then. He reflects on how she has become much stronger now compared to before, but Errol has not wasted any time either. He realizes that he hasn't seen her for a whole year, and it's hard for him to even imagine how strong she has become during this time. Azadin shakes his head and says that one way or another he will hand over the page to the regional leader himself for the common good. Derek states that he is actually a higher-ranking officer, which means his order cannot be rejected. Suddenly, one of their subordinates runs out to them and reports that a serious incident has occurred at the eastern gate. To understand what happened there, they are transported for a while to the checkpoint at the eastern gate. The guard is on duty, unaware that his life will soon change dramatically. He finds Targi approaching them in the company of people who, at first glance, are not very well armed. The guard stops them, saying that there are too many of them to let through right now, so they shouldn't set up camp. Targi approaches the guard and calls him by name, saying that he is doing his job well. He immediately hands him a bag of money, explaining that he wanted to give it as a token of gratitude for his hard work. The guard says in a quiet voice that he has been put in an awkward position because he is also a knight. Targi explains that if something goes wrong, they both face nothing but punishment from the church minister. The knight smiles and prepares to let them pass, when suddenly a sharp sword pierces his eye. A terrifying scarred warrior, likely a cultist, deals a fatal blow to an innocent guard. Targi steps back in shock and sees the armored body fall, blood beginning to flow from it. This comes as a great shock to him, as he had hoped to get inside without unnecessary violence. Meanwhile, the other knights, who had already come under the command of this incomprehensible warrior, finished off the rest of the guards. Targi asks why they had to kill them, but he states that there is no point in raiding if you can't even have fun. Targi reproaches him for making his life difficult. There are a large number of guards everywhere, but the cultists do not care much about this. He decides to use his dark magic, looks at his hand and starts moving his fingers. His skin begins to split apart and a huge number of spiders emerge from it, as if he were a large nest. After this, he looks at his minions and gently blows on his palm, directing the spiders in their direction. These spiders immediately begin to rapidly penetrate the bodies of still living people in order to carry out terrifying metamorphoses. They almost instantly gnaw holes in the skin and rush inside their bodies, almost immediately changing them. The bodies of these unfortunate people, who have condemned themselves to this fate, begin to change rapidly, swelling to monstrous proportions. Targi looks at this with incredible disgust and does not understand how it is possible to possess such supernatural powers. The bodies of the stung people gradually return to shape, and they declare that they are now filled with strength. Targi looks at his interlocutor and says that he is a heretic of the cult. Smiling, the heretic notes that Targi took a very long time to think for a person with a higher education. He immediately suggests that they work together, as this is a very profitable collaboration for both of them. After that, he smiles and says that there is one more reason why Targi should agree to cooperate. With these words, he again sends out an unspoken command located inside Targa, which causes him great pain. Targi falls to the ground, clutching his heart, realizing that just a little more and he will simply burst into pieces. After this, the heretic approaches his minions, who look at him with lifeless eyes. Smiling, he says that he doesn't want them to let anyone in here and orders them to send everyone on their way. He also states that the rat needs to be captured alive, and to do this, it needs to be found as quickly as possible and brought here. The city gradually begins to suspect that something is happening, but still does not understand the scale of the tragedy that is coming. One of the trade association employees calmly packs his backpacks to leave the city for a while. However, when he approaches the gate, he meets several people who are also standing there and talking animatedly about something. He asks them what's going on, and they tell him that these guys are forbidding him from leaving the village. The merchant asks the guard why he was suddenly no longer allowed to leave the village. The spider-infested guard says the demands are based on what his master wants and are not subject to question. The merchant feels lucky and says that they have no right to stop an honest merchant. After this, he orders them to disperse towards the city, stating that he is leaving and they are just ordinary mercenaries. After a while, he grabs him by the head, making it clear that it is better not to joke with them and not to try to insult them. The semi-conscious man says that he has already said that no one will leave here. The remaining free people understand that it is better not to joke with these mercenaries and try to quickly retreat. However, those who are the most impudent are not in a hurry to let go, and these people say that they feel very strange. Blood starts to drip profusely from their mouths, and they say that they are very hungry, which means they need to eat. The merchant watches in horror as the man in front of him turns into a hideous monster, his jaw splitting open. He already closes his eyes, realizing that he hardly has any chance of getting out of here alive. However, after a few moments, he hears the sound of an arrow hitting the soft flesh and is able to open his eyes. He discovers that one of the brutes assigned to guard the place has been fatally wounded in the head. The merchant turns around in fear to understand what is happening and who is his savior. Another monster is also looking for its opponent, hoping to defeat him and devour his body. However, before the creature can even comprehend what is happening to it, Azadine appears out of nowhere and pierces the back of its head with a spear. The merchant is freed, while both monsters quickly turn into rotting piles of meat. Azadine draws his spear with a distinctive sound, spraying blood several meters away. On closer inspection, he discovers that spiders are crawling on it, which are clearly not ordinary insects. Azadine says in a serious voice that these creatures are followers of the Spider Queen and are called Athri. Panic breaks out in the city, and all the townspeople begin to run home to lock themselves in anticipation of the massacre. Azadine remains calm as the opponents he faces do not pose much of a threat. Suddenly he hears familiar voices calling out to him and immediately turns towards them. Midiam asks him if he has defeated all his enemies, to which he states that this is only the beginning. He immediately orders them to head to the tents to stock up on water and food, and Ismail is surprised by such urgency. Azadine explains that delay will be like death, since starvation destroys far more people than any war. Midiam suddenly becomes very frightened and tells the protagonist that danger has appeared behind him again. Azadine turns around to see the people he just killed suddenly rise from the dead. Azadine jumps to the side to avoid being grabbed, realizing that the situation is far more dire. He looks closely at these creatures and realizes that they have not simply risen from the dead. Now these giants look like ordinary zombies who claim that they are very hungry and need meat. Also, a large number of spiders fall out of their mouths, and living tissues become very fragile and easily destroyed. Azadine speculates that the spiders control the creatures' nervous systems, but their brains have long since died. Their eyes suddenly begin to glow green and they rush forward, trying to grab him, claiming that they are hungry. Azadine jumps back again and wonders what would happen if he tried to set them on fire with electricity. He then dodges an attack that would otherwise have blown his head off. He throws the towel sharply towards his opponent to briefly disorient him. As he moves forward, he reflects on how success is a gamble that is not guaranteed, but in this world, everything needs to be tried. With these words, he summons spiritual energy to conduct electricity through the fabric clinging to the opponent. A powerful charge instantly deals incredible damage to the swarm located inside this monster. Some of the creature's organs explode, and it falls to the side for a while, but gets up quite quickly. Within a few seconds, Azadine is forced to make sudden movements to avoid being pierced by the enemy's sharp limbs. He makes several leaps away from his opponent as he begins to transform into something hideous. Azadine nevertheless maintains a cheerful disposition, assuming that his opponent has finally decided to evolve. A few moments later, someone calls him by name and throws a torch in his direction to make it easier to fight. Azadine easily intercepts the fire stick and prepares to roast his enemies. The opponents try to prevent this and rush forward, but he manages to deliver a quick blow to push them back. The creepy monsters start to feel worse and loudly declare that it is very hot. Ismail understands that any opportunity the opponents have must be blocked and sets the ground around them on fire. Thus, they find themselves surrounded by a ring of fire, which cannot be passed through without serious burns. Even though they could sacrifice some of their life force to survive, a magical restriction prevents them from doing so. Azadine understands that the assistants have done a good job and says that they need to act more carefully. The merchants, clearly unhappy that their fare was disrupted, claim that these freaks should be set on fire. Soon, these creatures find themselves upright, as well-aimed torch throws set them ablaze like matches. Azadine picks up one of the torches and says that these creatures better stand still. While delivering a powerful blow to one of the creatures, he adds that he really likes monsters with a crispy crust.
The last drops of life force leave this monster, and without uttering a single sound, he falls to the ground. Azadin watches his opponent carefully, hoping that he will not present any surprises and will remain defeated calmly. The other merchants say that they need to burn the rest of the creatures they find to cleanse the city. Azadin realizes that he needs to get out of here and asks how many supplies his comrades have collected, receiving a satisfactory answer. Ismail asks if he should bring some goats to leave this place faster. Midiam steps forward and asks if he thinks their actions are helpful. Azadin doesn't have time to answer before Owl appears behind the girl and addresses the main character. She reports that a new contractor has arrived, and Azadin asks where he is. The owl lands on his shoulder for a while and explains that there are very difficult circumstances surrounding this. Sniffing the wind, she notes that their contractor has just breathed his last. Azadin addresses his apprentices and tells them that they must prepare to depart for the western gate. A few moments later, he takes to the air, hoping to reach his contractor, whoever he may be, as quickly as possible. Midiam happily says that at this rate, this man will continue to help them free of charge. Azadin quickly encounters another opponent and engages in a fierce fight with him. This enemy turns out to be even stronger than the previous ones and can withstand serious injuries for quite
A long time. Azadin proves too fast for the spider anyway, confidently dodging all the blows. He, irritated, reflects on the fact that these creatures do not die, despite the fact that he puts in a lot of effort. He assumes that an ordinary person would have long since lost consciousness or died, but this creature remains unharmed. While studying his enemy, he notes that the creature continues to mutate and their numbers are constantly growing. He understands that if the matter drags on, he simply won't be able to get through to the contractor, who is already dead. A few moments later, arrows with tips that sparkle with lightning cut through the air. When the arrow hits the arachnid, it detonates, striking it with a powerful bolt of lightning. Midiam fires a great shot that instantly kills the creature, leaving it unable to regenerate. She happily reports that she knew the shot would work, as the creatures are vulnerable to fire and electricity. Ismail notices that his friend is losing a lot of strength and tries to catch her so that she doesn't fall to the ground. Azadin is closely watching the results of the attack and is in no hurry to comment. He admits that she is well trained and considers this shot to be a true masterpiece worthy of respect.